Chaos in the Polish parliament as far-right lawmaker extinguishes Hanukkah candles, delaying confidence vote in new government.
Tensions rise ahead of this week's EU Leaders Summit as European Commission Vice President Vera Jourova criticises a Hungarian campaign against the European Commission.
Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky meets with President Biden and top Republicans in Washington to make an appeal for continued US military aid.
The night train connecting Berlin, Brussels and Paris is back on track for the first time in nearly a decade. Far-right Polish lawmaker Grzegorz Braun uses a fire extinguisher to put out candles on a menorah lit to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. The stunt took place as MPs gathered to hear newly elected Prime Minister Donald Tusk's inaugural speech. All major parties condemned Braun's actions, saying there would be no tolerance for anti-Semitic or xenophobic behaviour in Parliament. Braun was fined and excluded from the day's proceedings, with the parliamentary speaker saying he would report the incident to prosecutors. Tusk called the incident a disgrace and said it must never happen again. The events delayed a parliamentary vote to approve his pro-EU government, which he later won. The new cabinet will now be sworn in by President Andrzej Duda on Wednesday.
Tensions are rising on the eve of this week's EU Leaders Summit in Brussels as Hungary continues with threats to block important decisions. The Vice President of the European Commission, Vera Jourova, is sharply criticising a campaign by the Hungarian government launched last month against the EU's executive body. The billboards show Commission President von der Leyen alongside a message that says we don't dance to their tune.
This billboard campaign is outrageous and scandalous. And this campaign is offending my boss, Ursula von der Leyen. It's offending me as well, and I think that most, if not all, the members of the college.
The Commission became the target of a campaign that was part of a national consultation that levelled serious accusations against Europe's political agenda. The EU institution denounces the accusations.
I saw the things which are very verifiable lies. For instance, Brussels wanting to abolish public support for utility costs. It's a lie. Brussels wanting to abolish the Hungarian windfall tax. It's a lie. It's for the member states to decide. For instance, something juicy, Brussels' alleged support for Palestinian organization reaching Hamas. It's pure lie.
The controversy adds fuel to the fire of an already tense summit that begins on Thursday. Hungary is threatening to block the opening of negotiations with Ukraine on its EU membership and also a financial lifeline to help the war-torn country.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arriving at the White House on Tuesday for talks with President Biden. It's Zelensky's third visit to Washington since Russia's full-scale invasion of his country more than 21 months ago, and there's a lot on the line. Additional US aid for Ukraine is being blocked by Republicans who want the money linked to stricter security at the US-Mexico border. Zelensky is hoping to persuade them to open the coffers.
Less depend on aid, and we are moving.
Finland says it will partially reopen its border with Russia after completely closing it last month. The Vaalimaa and Nirala border points will reopen on Thursday for 1 month, but authorities say they'll close them again at the first sign of what they called manipulated migration. Helsinki has accused Moscow of orchestrating a migration crisis on its doorstep. According to the Finnish authorities, almost 1,000 asylum seekers, mainly from Somalia, Iraq and Yemen, have presented themselves at border crossings between the two countries since the beginning of August.
Hopes for finishing a critical climate summit on time are fading as countries are still far apart on key issues, including an agreement on what to do about fossil fuels causing dangerous global warming. COP28 is scheduled to finish around midday, but Monday's release of a draft agreement has angered certain countries.
Ce texte, il est insuffisant. Il y a des éléments qui sont pas acceptables en l'état. C'est une déception.
The need for urgency to replace and reduce fossil fuels in the power sector in this critical decade is completely missing. The language on coal contradicts EU energy policies, and it allows for new coal power plants.
The draft calls for countries to reduce consumption and production of fossil fuels in a, quote, orderly and equitable manner. Campaigners say it's far from enough.
Saudi Arabia and other fossil fuel producing nations have pushed back, and eventually what we are seeing a language which only talks about reducing consumption and production of fossil fuels. That's unacceptable. We as civil society reject the text because we are already going through climate emergency.
A revised text is expected later Tuesday that takes into account many of the comments from participants. Final decisions by delegates have to be by consensus.
As COP28 draws to a close, a draft deal last night called for countries to reduce their consumption and production of fossil fuels. It's a conversation that's dominated talks, and while some have criticised the text in that it wasn't robust enough, calling for the phasing out of fossil fuels, COP28 President-designate Sultan Al-Jaber said it was a step in the right direction.
We have made progress, but we still have a lot to do. You know what remains to be agreed, and you know that I want you to deliver the highest ambition on all items, including on fossil fuel language.
Nations will now provide the UAE with their thoughts amid calls for multilateralism and collaboration. As the two-week summit wraps, so do the periphery events that have taken place at the many pavilions on the Expo City Dubai site. And there were congratulations for Azerbaijan for being chosen to host next year's COP29. Now all eyes will be on next year's host city and maintaining the momentum in the global fight against climate change.
Palestinians rushed to save people trapped under the rubble in central Gaza after an Israeli airstrike. Around 18,000 people in the enclave have been killed since the war began in October, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The vast majority of them, women and children, thousands more are believed lost under the rubble. The war and siege have also taken a heavy toll on basic services, especially healthcare. Only 14 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are functioning. The situation is all but certain to deteriorate, as Israel says that it is prepared to continue fighting for months.
סך הכל נעצרו רק בחודש האחרון יותר מ-500 מחבלים. יותר ממחציתם נלקחו להמשך חקירה בשטח ישראל.
Meanwhile, the U.S. says it is concerned about reports that Israel deployed white phosphorus munitions it provided in October in southern Lebanon.
I do think it's important to remind that white phosphorus does have a legitimate military utility in terms of illumination and producing smoke to conceal movements. And obviously, anytime that we provide items like white phosphorus to another military, it is with the full expectation that it'll be used in keeping with those legitimate purposes.
In Egypt, UN Security Council ambassadors are visiting the Rafah border crossing days after the United States vetoed a council resolution for a ceasefire.
German prosecutors have formalized charges against 27 people arrested last year on suspicion of belonging to a terror cell and plotting a coup d'etat. Authorities say the group had created a quasi-governmental organization and was preparing to storm the German parliament and arrest MPs in an effort to topple the government. The suspects reportedly belong to the Reichsbürger movement that rejects Germany's post-war constitution. Prosecutors say they were planning to negotiate a post-coup order with Russia.
The night train connecting Berlin to Brussels and Paris is running again for the first time in nearly a decade. The cooperation between the German, Austrian, French and Belgian train companies is paving the way for a more climate-friendly Europe.
Wir freuen uns, dass nach 9 Jahren es wieder einen Nachtzug nach Paris gibt. Dafür haben wir lange gekämpft als Back on Track. Und jetzt sind wir hier und können die Abfahrt des ersten Zuges begleiten.
The demand for the sleeper trains linking major European capitals has seen seats fully booked for weeks in advance.
Natürlich muss man auch beim Rollmaterial, gerade jetzt hier auf dieser neuen Relation, sehen, dass man hier in den nächsten Jahren dann auch modernere Züge bringt, um eben konkurrenzfähig zu sein zu anderen Anbietern. Und da ist man aber, denke ich, auch mit dem Nightjet der neuen Generation dann auf einem guten Weg.
Germany's Deutsche Bahn has suffered from a lack of investment, with Austrian railways far outstripping the quality of its trains.
It was a pleasant trip, so it's quite comfortable to not have to worry about catching the flights or something like that. And only disadvantage is they're slightly late occasionally, as it's today.
As demand for night services increases, train companies will be under pressure to invest in infrastructure if they want to attract more business customers.
Fall asleep in Berlin and wake up in Brussels. This year, sleeper trains are making a comeback. And with climate change dominating headlines, train companies are putting down tracks to connect European cities with one another. But will that be enough to make travelling more about the journey than the destination? Liv Stroud on the sleeper train for Euronews.